Hello, everyone. We are going to wait just another minute or two to make sure everyone is able to join us, but we will get started in a moment. So sit tight. Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Diani Figa. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for me anyway, to this first program in our series about working with some of the external stakeholders who at some point in the process have an integral role in collections care. This program is made possible with funding primarily from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and I am largely going to turn things over to our speaker, Amelia Berm-Amig, in a few minutes, but have just a few quick pieces of housekeeping. First off, if you would like to follow along with closed captions, you may need to activate that setting within your Zoom interface. Toward the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a box that says CC live transcript, or it may be available under more. If you click that and then click show subtitle, there may be a lag, but then they should appear, and instructions are in the chat as well. Thank you. Today's event is set up as a webinar, which among other things means that participants cannot actually speak and interact beyond typing in the chat box. So if you have questions after Amelia's presentation, please go ahead and drop them there. This program is being recorded for folks to be able to catch up if they are not able to join us here live. So just a heads up for everyone here, but also hello if you are watching from the future. And this is looking ahead a bit, but just to get it on all of your calendars now, the next program in this series is next Wednesday, March 16th, and will be on the topic of working with art services providers. Finally, at the end of the session today, you will be directed immediately to a very quick post-program survey. These evaluations will only take you a few minutes to fill out and are really very important for us, not only to share with our funders, but to be able to continually learn and improve our program offerings. So your feedback is greatly appreciated. And with that, I will turn everything over to the Conservation Center's preservation specialist, Amelia Berm-Amig.
Thanks, Diani. Hello, everyone. My name is Amelia Amig, and my pronouns are she and her. And I am a preservation specialist with the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I'm speaking with you today from the great Iron City of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I would like to acknowledge that Pittsburgh is built on the traditional ancestral lands of the Shawnee and Osage and other Native peoples who came before us. So thank you for joining us for the first episode in this series, which will examine the working relationships between cultural institutions and 4 different external groups. We'll kick things off today with preservation practices for art donors, and the upcoming episodes will look at working with fine art service providers, conservators, and digitization vendors. Each of these stakeholders can be an important partner for an archives, library, or museum as you care for and manage your collections. And so with this series, we wanted to spotlight these 4 groups take a look at who they are and what they do, and offer some tips that can hopefully help benefit these relationships from both sides. Before we get started, a quick note about our organization, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, or CCAHA. We are a nonprofit conservation lab and preservation services facility. Our conservators specialize in the treatment of paper-based items, including books, photographs, and other works on paper. Our preservation services staff, of which I am a part, work in the field, presenting programs and workshops and helping institutions plan for the future of their collections. CCHA also offers digitization services, fundraising assistance, housing and framing services, and more. We are based in Philadelphia, but we work with organizations and clients all across the country. You can learn more about us and what we do at our website, ccaha.org. So it's very fitting that we are starting this series with object donors because they are such important contributors to collecting institutions. Whether through a one-time gift or a number of donations over many years, donors help us grow our collections and they become part of an institution's history. Sometimes donations happen quickly and you may not have much time between the initial offer and when your site takes ownership of an item. But in other cases, you may get the chance to engage with a donor before the gift, and that can be a great opportunity to have some discussions around preservation. By encouraging actions that benefit the conditions in which an object is displayed or stored, you are starting the process for successful long-term care by your institution. So these can be helpful conversations to have. The conversation can start around a condition report of the item. It's worth asking if the item has ever had a condition report or was examined or treated by a conservator, and if those reports can be shared with you. If no examination has been done, it's a perfect time for a condition report. Condition reports provide important baseline information about an object and allow you to start planning for its care. If you're not able to do the report yourself, maybe the object is on the other side of the country, contracting a local registrar can be a worthwhile investment. This is especially true if the object is of high value, is complex or has condition issues, or if the object will need to travel a long distance in order to get to your site. For a donation of many items, an inventory will also benefit your planning efforts. Often collectors have some level of inventory themselves, and once you can get that information, it can be a good place for you to start. If no inventory exists, it's a great time to perform at least a rough inventory while things are still with the donor if you can. An inventory is also an opportunity to flag items with condition issues that might be candidates for conservation treatment. When speaking with folks about preservation in general, it can help to think about protecting an object or collection on cascading levels, similar to a nesting doll. At the building level, the importance of a stable climate in the preservation of objects cannot be overstated. Donors may not be aware that fluctuations in temperature and relative humidity can cause serious damage to objects and make other problems like pests even worse. At the enclosure level, we want to encourage the use of stable materials to house and store objects. And each level of enclosure that is used provides an additional layer of protection. Then for the object itself, it's about practicing safe handling and wearing gloves whenever appropriate. Gloves protect against salts and oils being transferred from our skin to an object. And so gloves are especially important when handling things like photographs or metal objects that can be more easily damaged by those pollutants. If gloves aren't an option or are not suggested for the type of material, make sure that hands are clean and dry before handling. On the building level, it's also important to think about the physical space in which collections are displayed or stored. Both the individual room or closet and the floor of the home that the object is on. As you probably already know, rooms with external walls are more affected by changes in the exterior weather than rooms on the interior of a home. Interior spaces will also see less immediate impact from opening and closing doors, which can bring in outside dirt, pests, and pollutants, and also affects the climate inside. Of course, many donors understandably live with their objects, and there may not be anything you can do to influence the location they choose for display or even storage. But if possible, it's great to encourage a storage location that's on the interior of the home and has more stable temperature and humidity levels, and to avoid storage in areas like basements or attics. If your donor has choices to make as far as which items are stored where in their home, those decisions can be based on the material type and the condition of the objects, with more sensitive materials getting priority for the better spaces with more stable climate. Say you do get the chance to do that condition report or inventory, and you're working on site with your donor. That might be a good opportunity to encourage smart choices in enclosures and storage materials. Perhaps it's a framed piece and you notice that there are some questionable materials in play, and you can offer resources for more appropriate materials to help preserve the piece. Especially if your donor is receptive to a bigger conversation on storage materials and is purchasing supplies themselves, it may help to offer a quick primer on some of the terms to look for. I think most of us know that in collections work, archival is used to denote materials that are chemically stable and will not produce harmful byproducts. But because the term archival is not regulated, it carries no true technical meaning in the commercial world. Materials are often described as archival in advertising for preservation materials and art supplies, and that can be confusing. It can be more beneficial to look for terms like acid-free and lignin-free rather than relying on that catch-all of archival. In reality, it can be difficult and costly to use all archival materials all the time, and so it's not a practical goal for everyone. Not everything has to be of the best quality, but the materials that are in direct contact with an object should be when possible. We don't have to order everything from the specialized archival supply vendors either. Other places may offer good quality supplies. It's smart to check the product descriptions and contact the manufacturer if something is not stated or is unclear. Really, we should be doing that even for products that come from the specialty vendors. Just because something is in an archival catalog does not mean that it is actually archival. I also wanted to mention the inclusive vendor list that we've developed at CCAHA, which might be of interest to a donor or to you as you are thinking about where to spend your money. The list is a work in progress, but we hope it will raise awareness for small businesses, particularly those that are BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and women-owned and or operated, as well as businesses that offer more sustainable products. Alternately, if a donor doesn't have their collection stored in boxes or any kind of primary enclosure, that is a great step to encourage. Almost any enclosure is better than nothing. To get started, cardboard boxes, as most cats like to demonstrate, will do just fine. You could also have objects wrapped in plastic sheeting, bubble wrap, or packing blankets. These materials should not be thought of as long-term solutions, though, because there is concern about the damage that they can cause. For example, we don't want objects in regular cardboard forever because the cardboard will eventually become very acidic and can damage the artifacts inside. The box itself may also break down and collapse, and that creates more problems. But a cardboard box would give the object a basic level of protection in the short term. Clear plastic bins are another great solution. Sterilite tubs or bins are fairly stable and inert, and often a lot cheaper than archival boxes. Enclosures really do all sorts of good things and can protect an object from a lot of types of harm. And we'll take a look at two of those trouble sources now. So pest damage is one concern, especially for collections that might have been stored in less than ideal spaces like a basement or a garage. Keeping collections in enclosures adds one more layer a pest has to get through before it reaches the object and starts causing real trouble. If an item has confirmed or suspected pest activity, maybe you can work with the donor to isolate the materials and help begin that control process before the items are transferred to your site. For pests and many other threats as well, monitoring is a great practice to encourage because it can help you catch smaller issues before they become bigger and more costly problems. And if you or your donor are unsure about what to do or how to proceed with a pest issue, it's best to contact an expert. For the object, that can be a conservator, and for the building, a pest management professional. Another conversation can be about light, and that can be very important if you're working with a donor on a gift of paper-based items, which are so sensitive to light and UV. Light is always a balance. We need visible light to see, but the damage from light adds up and is irreversible. Where you can, make recommendations that encourage minimizing light exposure and reducing or eliminating UV, including steps like keeping the lights off when not in use, making the switch to LED bulbs, and of course, storing items in enclosures when they're not on display. Having a high quality reproduction of the item created by a digitization vendor might be another route to consider, especially for something like a photograph or a map. Displaying a reproduction allows the donor to still enjoy the content of the item while the original object stays safe in storage. It's possible that a donor might feel the need to shine up an item before it is given to your site. So it can be good to reinforce that there's no need to clean or otherwise change an item in anticipation of the gift, unless it's something you've specifically talked about. If the donor is interested in pursuing evaluation and or treatment of an object prior to donation, that's fantastic, especially if they're willing to pay for it. This is a great opportunity to highlight the importance of working with a professional conservator who has specialized knowledge and extensive training in the preservation of cultural property. You can point the donor to resources like the American Institute for Conservation's Find a Professional database, which identifies conservators by where they are located and the type of material in which they specialize. So objects are most at risk when they're being handled and moved, and making informed choices about how an object is protected and how it is shipped are key to minimizing that potential for damage. So this is a really great thing to work with a donor on, whether the object is coming to you from across town or across the country. Everyone wants the object to have a safe journey from the donor to your site. Let's look at some possible scenarios for this that can create good opportunities for dialogue with your donor. If it's a local donation, whether you're going to pick up the object or the donor offers to bring it to your site, you definitely want to talk about how the item is packed. By then, you should also know if the object has any condition issues that would warrant special packing materials or methods. And if you don't know that, ask. If the item is not packed, this is your chance to suggest packing options that are based on the type of object, its condition, and the comfort level of the donor. Even if it's a short trip, you want to make sure that the item is protected within an enclosure, like a folder or a box, and that it's secure within that enclosure. We don't want it to go sliding around if someone has to brake suddenly at a stoplight. For transport, you can also suggest that the item be secured in a lidded box or a plastic tub to give some stability, to facilitate handling and protect the object from rain, wind, and other elements. The bin can be lined with clean towels or blankets for some additional padding. Also think about parking and access for the donor. Do you need to arrange parking close to the door or alert security that you'll be using a side entrance to facilitate the donation? And regardless of how small an item is, meeting a donor at the door with an object cart and gloves can reinforce that you are a responsible caretaker. If it's not a local situation and your donor is farther afield, you have a few options for contracting transport. Commercial shipping companies are one option, and typically here you and your donor would agree that they are able to safely pack and follow your packing instructions, and they can transport the package to the shipper's drop-off location. Fine art service providers are another option. These are companies who specialize in artwork and artifacts, and typically they offer packing, crating, transportation, and many other services. Usually in this case, you'll coordinate schedules with the donor and the shipper's truck will arrive to pack and collect the item and then deliver it to your site. The decision on which type of company to use can be rooted in a few things, including the monetary value and the size of the donation, the fragility or condition, the timeline for getting the shipment from the donor and to your site, and the availability of the donor to participate in the shipment process. There's a lot to consider in planning for a shipment, but here are a few points to keep in mind. As we talked about earlier, definitely speak with the donor about any existing condition issues an item has early in the process, as this may have an impact on the packing and shipping methods that you choose. Ideally, you'll have a condition report done, but if not, try to get at least clear photos of the item and approximate dimensions of any areas of damage. That info allows you to, 1, plan for special packing needs, and 2, to have documentation to compare with when you examine the item at receipt. If you are working with a fine art shipper, they will offer different levels of packing, and there again, your choices can be guided by the details of the object and the shipment. In addition to the object's condition and value, consider the distance and method it's traveling, and the staff and equipment who will be handling the object throughout its journey. Commercial shippers are often less costly and offer faster shipping timelines than a fine art service company can. Fine art shippers usually have preset schedules that their consolidated shuttle trucks will follow. So it's always smart to get quotes from a few companies so that you can compare costs and dates. Whichever packing and shipping option you choose, it is important to have clear communication with your donor and to stay in touch throughout the shipment process. Collections management practices at acquisition are an important part of establishing and maintaining physical and intellectual control of collections. There are a lot of details that are best captured right as an item comes in and you've got the donor on the line, so to speak, and the object is front and center on your work table. It's a great idea for local donors, when you can manage it, to have your deed of gift or other formal transfer paperwork ready so that you can get that completed when you meet with the donor. Having that document with you when you go to pick up the object or when the donor comes down to your site allows you to knock out that important step in person. A follow-up acknowledgement letter to the donor is a formal part of the gift recording process, in addition to just being nice to do. So if you already have an object in your custody and you need to finalize the deed of gift, you can include that paperwork with the acknowledgement letter. Remember to avoid sending a donor a deed of gift that is pre-signed by your organization, as that opens the door to trouble. And as part of that thank you letter, some sites will also include a small gesture of appreciation. For example, a few free admission passes to your site, which is a cool way to extend the relationship. Many sites also acknowledge donors in their newsletters or other publications. And if you have space to list or talk about the items there, that can illustrate to your audience the kinds of collections that your site is interested in, and it might help drive your collecting initiatives. I'm curious to hear of other ways your site may acknowledge object donors. And if that's something that your organization does and you're willing to share it, please post it in the comments. So intake is the time to get additional information from the donor. Provenance, purchase info, how the item was made and used and by whom, and related stories or photographs that help illustrate the object. If your site has a separate curatorial role or team, getting this information is likely in their bailiwick. But at some sites, the curatorial and registration roles are all bundled up. And in any case, it doesn't hurt to have multiple sets of eyes watching out for these details. As the object makes its way through your processing procedures and you're recording information for your database, that's another opportunity to create a more in-depth condition report if one hasn't yet been done, and make sure that that report is tied to the object and the file. And if an object is flagged as needing possible conservation work, it's excellent if you can arrange for a conservator to create a treatment report, treatment proposal, right when the item comes in. That way, you'll have the estimated costs on hand and you can budget for them or keep an eye out for funding opportunities for the treatment work. Many donors are, of course, interested in what's going to happen to an object once it enters the collection. When will this be put on display might be one of the first questions you get, and exhibition certainly is part of the process. In addition to the steps the object will go through as it is accessioned and cataloged, the donor might like to hear about the steps the object will go through when you're creating housing and enclosures for it, the stable materials that you'll choose, and the effort that goes into maintaining the secure climate-controlled storage space that the object will live in. And that storage space will, of course, look nothing like this image. You could also talk about how your organization ensures safe access and use of the collection for researchers and for loans to other institutions. Walking a donor through these processes can strengthen their interest in your site and make them an advocate for the good work that you do. In all discussions with donors, and I'm sure that this goes without saying, but it's important to tailor the message to the donor and the situation. Remember that the donor has probably given the best care that they could with the resources they had, or possibly they may have made considerable financial investments in the object with the best of intentions. Conversations with donors should always be thoughtful. So this is a big topic, and I'm only going to give it a quick glance, but there have been ongoing discussions for many years in the museum field about putting a monetary number on the cost of caring for collections. One of the thoughts behind this is that as your site is deciding whether or not it should accept something for the collection, you should have an approximate idea of the expected costs for personnel and materials to preserve the item for the long term, so that you are making good use of your resources. This idea can also include sharing those costs with the public, and specifically object donors, so that they see the investment your site is making in the care of the object and maybe are motivated to help support those efforts financially. The cost of collections care can be difficult to quantify, and of course, it can vary widely based on a number of factors. There are some good resources that look at this topic, and I have just a few of them listed here. Active Collections is an interesting and more recent book that looks at rethinking how we approach collections and collections management, and it includes some commentary on sharing the costs of collections care with the public. Obviously, this is something that you'll have to decide if it works for your organization and if it's appropriate for the donor and the situation at hand. But it's certainly something to think about, and it can be helpful to illustrate that there are very real costs behind collections care. So we'll wrap up with a quick look at some resources on preservation topics and collections care that can help you in working with your artifact donors and in navigating the acquisition process. There are lots of super resources available to help guide you. Around the web, there are some awesome resources for preservation and collections care. You're probably familiar with many of these, so I will just call out a few. The Cameo project, developed initially by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, is a great site for information on materials that are commonly used to wrap and store objects. Both the AIC Wiki and the Canadian Conservation Institute have a ton of information on a host of preservation topics, including the helpful framework of the 10 agents of deterioration, which breaks down common forces that cause harm to collections and offers strategies to block and mitigate those risks. Connecting to Collections Care is another fantastic resource that has a listserv forum and offers programming that discusses everything from materials and packing to collections care practices and more. And Stash C, which stands for Storage Techniques for Art, Science, and History Collections, is a wonderful site for inspiration and information on creating custom enclosures and storage housing. And here are just a few of the great publications that look at the donation process and all that fun paperwork that is central to good collections care. Museum registration methods is forever indispensable, and To Give and to Receive, a handbook on collection gifts and donations, is an excellent guide on the donation process. I hope that you'll find these resources useful as you build the important relationships with your object donors. And with that, I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your time today. I'm happy to help connect you with resources however I can. My email is listed here. If you have questions or want to drop me a note later on, please do. CCAHA has many great resources shared on our website and our YouTube channel also, so please take a look there as well. And one last plug here, but if you're interested in learning more about working with fine art service providers, conservators, or digitization vendors, we'll look at those groups in the next episodes of this series, and I hope you'll tune in for those. So thanks again, everyone. And if there are any questions or comments, happy to chat about those now. I'll take a look back through the chat real quick. Awesome, definitely. Yeah, happy to share a copy of the presentation and also a list of the resources mentioned here today. We'll send those out. And if anyone thinks of any questions going forward, again, I'm happy to chat about that. Please just drop me a note. But thank you so much for tuning in, everyone.